Hi everyone, I'm Broken Meeple. Win or lose, I'm going to be honest with you. After years of basically silence, we now finally have some more content for Viticulture, which, as much as recently Stonemaier Games have not been impressing me with their lineup, I still have Scythe, Viticulture and Wingspan on my shelf. Scythe might not stay on my shelf forever though, that is dropping a bit, but Viticulture and Wingspan are still two games that I really like. And I've got the wine crate here with all of the Viticulture content in, so for context, I had the first expansion, Tuscany. I sometimes use the special workers, but mainly for Tuscany you want the structures, you want the new board, those two things alone are worth the expansion price alone, but the special workers are nice as well, and of course those mamas and papas starting cards, so a few aspects of Tuscany I wasn't that keen on, the whole making oil and cheese and stuff just overcomplicated the game, but the other aspects I liked. It was just a modular thing. The whole thing when they brought out the essentials versions was just confusing, and they clearly didn't listen to feedback from people because they kept cherry picking some of, but not all of the good stuff from Tuscany and stuff to put in the essentials. It was just kind of weird. It just felt like an easy way to make some money. But we then got the Viticulture World, and Viticulture World I was probably a little bit generous on. I gave it just a 7 out of 10, and I think really it probably should have been at maximum 6, possibly even a 5. Viticulture World was the attempt to make this a co-op game, and the problem with it was nothing to do with that whole contrived controversy that happened with it, but it was more the fact that the game just became a luck fest. The co-op game is entirely dependent on luck of the draw with various aspects of the game, and that determined the difficulty of the game. So it didn't feel like a worthwhile thing to do. You had to learn a bunch of new rules. It was just a complicated way of doing things, and it didn't really turn out as well as I'd hoped. So that one just sits in the box and has not been played for ages. I have no intention of playing it again.
He's out of line, but he's right.
So now we have a new expansion, finally, Viticulture Bordeaux, which is basically a new board. And no, I'm not making any weird jokes about the fact that this is called Bordeaux and it's a board. Seriously, I cannot roll my eyes enough with some of the cringeworthy titles I've seen for videos online. Come on, guys. But, this is basically a new board. And that's all it is. It's a cardboard eco box, and that's it. There you go, we don't need that much anymore. You basically get a new board, you get a couple of rule books to go with it, you get some cubes, a few reference cards, a new batch of Autumna cards, so you can play this game solo using this particular board, and of course, the board itself. So, what is the new stuff? Well, let's move the Viticulture wine crate out of the way. Let's move these over here for a second. It's not going to be too easy to get the board in full show on camera, but don't worry, there will be pictures, so you'll be fine. Here we go. So this is the new board, and as you can see, it looks similar to the other ones. I mean, you still got the point track at the bottom, you still got the wake up chart from the Tuscany board, which you really want, and you'll notice it's still in 4 seasons, so you still got spring, summer, autumn, winter, and the card displays at the top. So there is some familiarity there, but there are some key differences that this board offers. So firstly, the wake up chart, it offers some more unusual bonuses here. You've got the usual thing like the spare worker and that, but you can also retrieve a worker, you can also level up grapes and wines, and there's even, if you got the grape token and went first, the bonuses here apply to everybody. So there's a tiny little bit of a positive interaction there. I would have liked for them to be more of those across the wake up charts, but it does mean that if, given that people very commonly like to go for number 7 to get the extra worker and the grape token, it's nice that when someone does, everybody gets a little bit of benefit going forward. So that's a nice little addition. You will also notice that the card displays have now got face-up slots, but only for the green and purple. I found that a bit weird, really. I mean, yes, this game did suffer from a luck of the draw problem, and I house ruled that with all the displays, you had 2 to 3 face-up cards. That was how I played my copy of Viticulture. It's nice to see that they share my viewpoint on some of this, but for whatever reason, they didn't do it with the yellow and blue cards. You still just draw from a flat deck, and you don't even draw so many and keep 1. I mean, at the bare minimum, you should at least say that when you draw visitor cards, you draw 2 and keep 1. That should be a basic thing. But why they didn't put face-up cards for these, I don't know. I think you still aren't going to need to put that house rule in, even though they haven't provided space for you, but that's a personal gripe. At least they have done it for the purples and the greens, and they've managed to draw it on that. You've still got bonuses with the different spots. It still caters for up to 6 players as before. But here's the 2 really new things here. Firstly, you've got a trade chart down here at the bottom. And basically, it gets rid of that influence map from the Tuscany board, which, let's face it, as much as I like the Tuscany board, we have to admit that influence map with the stars was weak sauce. That was basically the Achilles heel of that board. It didn't destroy it, but did anybody really care about a little mechanic where you put stars on a tiny little map and get little bonuses? Whoopie-doo. That was not needed. So what you've got now is a trade chart. So you've got the action to make trades, like you did before. But what I like in this one is now it tells you what types of trades you can make, and they're finite. So as soon as you make a trade, you put a little glass bead token on it, and it means that nobody else can make that trade for the rest of the game. So there's only so many here that you'll be able to do. I don't know why they didn't color in the squares of ones where it's like stupid, like you wouldn't pay a point to get a point. There's no point. Go for it, no pun intended. But other than that like minor little graphical glitch, it's still easy just to put the tokens on there. And I like the fact that you can really like gain some interesting stuff here. I mean, they've really made residual money a lot easier to get now. You actually get victory points as you level up around it, but you start with a residual money. So residual means that you get it as income each round, but now you can even trade for more residual money, and you have more ways to do the winemaking process on this board. So you're going to get more residual income generally, which is nice because let's face it, did anybody get that much residual income in the last game? Before the game like ended. The other main thing is that you'll notice that there's some banners underneath these particular spots here. So they've got cube spaces, which is where these come in. And the idea is that there's a space called Hire an Expert. You pay $2 and it allows you to put a cube on one of these expert spaces, which means that anytime you do that action in future, you get an additional benefit. And it's first come, first serve. So if you take one as an expert, nobody else can. This is a very neat addition. I really like this actually, because it enables you to kind of facilitate the type of strategy you're going for by getting experts on the specific spaces that are good for it. Now, that's not to say that all of these benefits are entirely equal, I must say. I mean, there are some that do seem a little bit meh compared to others, but, overall, they're generally pretty sweet. I mean, getting the ability to get victory points for how much you've planted and how much you've built is pretty sweet. Being able to use and rather than or on visitor cards can be pretty powerful. But then getting $1 per worker that's on the give tour to gain money space is pretty meh. At least it is in low player counts. It doesn't scale well, because it's all right in a 6-player game where you've got 3 workers there, including yours, and you can get like $5 from this space. But in a 2-player game, only one person can go there, which means if you put an expert there, you literally only get $1 as a benefit for going there. Whoop-de-friggin' do. It costs you $2 to put the expert there in the first place. So these powers do range a little bit in terms of game balance, and player scaling does have an effect, particularly on that tour one. So it's not perfect, it's not a perfect system, but then balance was never Stonemeyer's strong suit. But it's not the end of the world. I don't really play Viticulture as a 2-player anyway. It does kind of suck when I want to play it solo, but I tend to play this as a 3 to 4-player game, so you get 2 spaces, and the expert space is not too bad with 3 or 4, but it's definitely player scaling dependent on that one. And other than that, the only other minor thing is that because you have some of these like extra ways to do stuff now, your starting setup is different, and even the end game scoring is slightly different. You won't be able to read it on here, but basically, in addition to the mamas and papas thing that you've got, the 2 cards, the red and blue cards that gave you starting resources, you start with more stuff now. So a bit of extra money, some grapes, some residual income, and even a field face up. Because now, the fields, you remember those 3 square fields on your board? You normally had them face up, and there was this annoying trend where basically in every game you sold at least 1 if not 2 of those fields, got loads of money for them, and it was basically an early game strategy for a ton of money. Thankfully, that is now gone. You start with a level 6 field, the other 2 are now sold already, and you have to go to an action space to buy those back. You start with more money, but now you don't have that stupid thing of, I must go and sell a field in the first turn because it gets me $7 and that's just infinitely powerful. So thank God we got rid of that, because that was an annoying little thing that was a trend that happened. But, at the end of the game, you also now have more reasons to have money. You convert all your grapes and wine that you've got left over into money, and every $10 you have basically is an extra victory point. given that this game only goes up to like 40 odd victory points at times, one victory point here and there can swing a victory. And I like that it now makes money more important at the end, because I think previously you basically didn't really care about leftover money, and you certainly didn't care about leftover grapes and wine. But now if you weren't able to fill an order with them, you actually do get some benefit out of them. Maybe not tons of benefit, but some. And I mean, it says, what is it? Convert wines and grapes to lira. So basically, for whatever it is valued. Now, if you happen to have a bunch of wines at like rating 8 or 9 that you just weren't able to fill an order for, well, each one of those is almost a victory point by itself, you know, so it can at least get you some nice little benefit. But that's basically the board in a nutshell. So as you can see, it takes the sort of layout of Tuscany, throws in a few little extras here and there, but what the design like nature of this, you know, what they're trying to do is effectively they're trying to give you a slightly faster game, because now you have a quick start mode effectively, and this certainly is noticeable when you play this with 5 or 6, even though I still don't often want to play this with 5 or 6, but it gives you a little bit more agency with the card draw, it gives you more money to sort of get going, it increases the impact of said coins, it focuses you more on the winemaking process, so strategies that didn't necessarily like work with winemaking in the first place are no longer as viable. Not to say that they're not viable, but they're not as game breaking as they used to be, particularly with the structures. You've got additional ways to get a worker, so instead of like having to train a worker here, which is still sadly in this game a paramount thing you need to do. I mean, I did wish that they introduced a way to not make getting loads more workers important, but let's face it, if you try to win this game with only 2 workers, you will lose, end of story. But I do like the fact that as well as the spare worker from this wake up chart, you now also have one that lets you retrieve a worker from autumn when you get to the winter stage. So I mean, that's a nice little addition. It's another way to get a worker without having to necessarily buy it for money. But yeah, I still wish that they put less emphasis on getting loads of workers, but it's just one of those things you got to deal with in this game. But I like it, you know, and you've even got to take any action space down here that may let you get a worker, you know, a bit earlier than usual. You got to pay $1 to use it, but you know, it means that you could train a worker earlier in the round, or even like, you know, plant stuff and draw stuff like when you're in the autumn, despite the fact you normally would only be able to do it in the spring or summer. So you get a little bit of extra flexibility. Now the reverse of this board is basically the basic board. So it's the one you got in the base game. It's just got a little bit of extra stuff on it and the face-up cards and that. But this is what the base game board is. It means you can chuck away the old one and everything will still fit in your wine crates, you know, out of shot there. You know, so you can chuck away that board and it will still fit in fine. But let's face it, who the hell is playing base Viticulture these days? You want the revised board, so you're hoping that this one is going to be pretty sweet. Now, there are some blemishes, again, from a component perspective. So you get 2 rule books with this. You get a rule book, which doesn't have a lot of extra rules in it. And frankly, if you already know how the Tuscany board works, then you already know how the wake-up chart works. So really, you're only reading a few extra pages for additional setup and what these expert bonuses do, which, let's face it, they're pretty self-explanatory. So you don't actually have a lot to read. Which does forgive the fact that they don't give you a friggin' reference aid for this. You know, in the base game, you got a rules reference. In Tuscany, you got a rules reference. In this game, you don't get a rules reference. I'd rather have a rules reference for everybody rather than having to go for a rule book. Now, thankfully, if you're familiar with Viticulture, a lot of this is going to be pretty easy for you. But if you're relatively new to the game or teaching new players, reference aids are important, and it's just like unforgivable that they just didn't bother to put one in here. Would it have killed you to have put even just one? I mean, you should have 1 per player. But, you know, if you're gonna be stingy on that front, then at least put 1 in the game. But sadly, there isn't. So, you know, you're gonna have to teach all the symbology and hope everybody remembers what everything does. Or you're gonna have to use one of the older reference sheets and try and filter out the stuff that isn't relevant for this board. You also then get the Autumnal revised rules. So basically, the only thing that's revised is mainly the deck of cards, because obviously the way that Autumnal worked was that you didn't necessarily play against a proper player. You basically, every time you change seasons, you flip a card and it blocks certain actions, and the card tells you which actions to block, but some of them, like the experts and the trade chart, actually fundamentally block those as well, so you do have that aspect. The Autumnal is a very easy one to pilot, and solo mode is fun-ish. You know, Viticulture is not one that I tended to want to play solo. You know, as much as I like the mechanics of Viticulture, I think the multiplayer like blocking and figuring out where people are likely to go for actions and stuff, and how many workers they've got, you know, where you can kind of predict what they're going to do, is more interesting than going up against an Autumner, because the Autumner basically just has a set amount of victory points and you've got to beat them by the end of the game. There's a pacing variant where they have a sort of thing where it climbs depending on how fast you go. You can throw that in if you like, but at the end of the day you've got to beat their set number of points. The problem is with the solo mode is that it's a bit like Viticulture World. It's a bit of a luck fest as to how well you do, because the actions that they block, this is a game where you only get 6 rounds to like finish the game. Not many multiplayer games finish in 6 rounds. I mean, people are blocking each other, people aren't hyper efficient with their actions, so a multiplayer game will take more than 6 rounds typically, but you have to do it in 6 rounds. And if mistakes are made, or if the opponent, like Autumner, blocks your spaces, you don't get as much time to recover, and you have to get workers because you physically cannot beat the Autumner score in 6 rounds if you don't get more workers. But the thing is that you might have a turn where it's like, I really need to go to these spaces. Oh, what a shame, the Autumner just blocked them. Oh, great. What if they'd drawn the other card? Oh, they wouldn't have even done anything in this round. Oh, great. So literally by luck of the draw, I'm screwed. Yes, you've got your grande worker to go onto a space if it's blocked, but you can only use that once. And then you get into autumn. That's like, right, well, I really do need to harvest right now. Oh, what a shame. I just blocked the harvest step. And, you know, there's multiple difficulty ratings for this autumner. You know, you can use, you know, like easy, very easy, normal, hard, very hard. And then there's even other ways to tweak the difficulty slightly with the pacing variant, but basically you're sort of going, right, do you have a 7th year for very easy? Do you start with any VP? And you know, here does the autumner start higher up the board and stuff like that? But honestly, the difficulty level with this game is really just dictated by the randomness of these cards, because if the AI is basically blocking you every time you want to go somewhere, you're playing this on expert mode. But if the AI stays out of your face for the whole game, you're playing it on easy. You know, the difficulty modifiers in here aren't what dictate your chances of winning, it's this deck of cards. And this deck of cards is entirely random. You can't predict where the AI will go to spaces, but you can do that with other people, because you can look at their displays, you can look at what they've got and think, right, that person already has pretty full fields and doesn't even have a green card in their hand. You know what? They're probably not going to go to the plant spot, so, or the, you know, that spot, so that should be fine. They probably won't even draw green cards this round. So I reckon those 2 spaces are safe, but I do need to go and get an expert. They might be tempted to do that. They got a bit of money. You know what? I'm going to go there first. That sort of stuff you can do in a multiplayer game. You can't do it with this. The lack of any sense of predicting what this thing is going to do takes a lot of the fun out of the solo mode. And it's not that the solo mode is terrible. I still love doing everything you do in Viticulture, but having an opponent that basically just randomly dictates whether you have any chance of winning or losing is a bit much. I mean, you play this on normal mode and it's pretty damn challenging to win this game. You know, you ideally need to play it on easy or very easy, really. You know, you play this on hard or very hard and you're basically playing on sadist mode, or masochist mode, I guess is the word. So it's not ideal.
I'm lucky.
That's not a superpower.
But Luke, what about these reference cards that you have here? They basically list out all the expert abilities. That's it. They don't tell you how they work. They don't explain in any more detail what each of them do. They just simply list them out. This is purely useful only for people who can't read upside down. That's it. Everybody else who can see the board doesn't need this card. So you went to the trouble of printing these out, but you couldn't print a single reference aid. Why?
I don't get it.
Now you may be wondering about compatibility issues. Now for starters, you can't make this compatible with Viticulture World. You can't. Viticulture World was its own little spin-off thing. In fact, I don't even think it should have been an expansion to this game. I think Viticulture World should have been released as its own spin-off game. Releasing it as an expansion, I think, was a mistake. But that's another story for another day. But the idea is that this will be compatible with everything from Tuscany. Every module, even the ones that nobody really even plays. It'll be compatible. You may notice there's no space for orange cards. That's because you draw a bunch at the start of the game and you pick which ones you want. And then if you have an ability that lets you draw like a grey card, so any card, you can draw more structures that way. So, you know, structures will still feature. You can still use the special workers. And if you really want to use the, you know, the olive oil stuff and the tomatoes and the cheese or whatever, then you can still use that. So this is fully compatible with everything apart from World, which which is a solid thing. I was afraid that they were going to drop the ball on that one, but no, you know, we can still take the best elements of Tuscany and shove them on this board. So after playing this both single and multiplayer, how does it feel? You know, is this a worthy board? It is. Yeah, I gotta be truly honest, this is a very good board. It's not perfect. I have mentioned little blemishes here and there, like I wish they stopped making training workers like paramount to the game. I do wish that the you know, some of these expert abilities maybe were a little bit more balanced here and there. There's definitely a few that I would gun for more than others, but you know, the fact that the Give Tour one is entirely player dependent seems a little bit of a, you know, easy thing that they could have spotted in playtesting. How did they not spot that was an issue? So there are little gripes here and there, but overall I think the stuff that they throw into this, oh, it is really, really good. You know, it's fixing a lot of the small issues from the original Viticulture. Residual income is more easier to get. Money means more. You have some face-up cards to choose from, even though they really should have done it with all the colours. So maybe I'm going to house rule that in for yellow and blue in the future. I mean, it's not going to break the game. It's just going to make my version better than others. But, yeah, the wake-up chart, having another way to get a worker and having some stuff that works for multiplayer as well, you know, that's pretty cool. The trade chart, infinitely more, you know, interesting than the whole map thing from before. I like the fact that you don't have that stupid little early game strategy of selling a field immediately to get a ton of money. You know, that's now gone. So there's a lot of little things that this board does that fixes some of those little broken elements from before. Maybe not all of them, and certainly not, you know, it's not a perfect board, but it is pretty much the way I'm going to play Viticulture from now on. If somebody just wants to play the normal Tuscany board, I'm cool with that. So essential, probably not. I will never play base Viticulture again though. I will always play with the Tuscany stuff on top, otherwise I don't want to play Viticulture. You know, it got to that stage. But honestly, if I have this board, even if I'm teaching it to new players, I'm going to play with this board because I think this board overall is better than the Tuscany board. Yeah, and the Tuscany board was already pretty much paramount, so blemishes here and there, yes, but I still think that this is like the best of the three boards. Yeah, forget Viticulture World, let's ignore that. This one is the best of the base, the Tuscany, and now this board. I'm going to use this one every time, and if people are going to want to play Viticulture, I'm hoping that they have this board as well. So, essential, no, but bloody damn good, I gotta say. I'm giving Bordeaux over a 9 out of 10. It's not essential. You can still get by with the Tuscany board, and it'll still be a really great game, but you do have those blemishes here and there. But the fact that this fixes a lot of those little elements, even though it doesn't, you know, do it perfectly, you know, it still is easily like a better board than Tuscany, and that's already pretty high praise. So I'm going to use this board from now on. I'll be curious to know in the comments if anybody prefers the base or the Tuscany or prefers this board, so by all means let me know. I'll be interested to know your thoughts on that. But I think Bordeaux, if you're a Viticulture fan, is just one of those expansions you probably ought to get. It's not going to cost you loads, and I think it's going to be an overall big improvement. So 9 out of 10. Been a long time since I've given that for a Stonemaier product, hasn't it? But yeah, credit where it's due. It's a solid expansion for a game that, you know, needed more plays, I think, in recent years. You know, it hasn't hit the table in a while, but now, thanks to this board, it has, and I hope it will do so more times in the future. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up here and thumb it up on Board Game Geek if you can. Subscribe to the channel if you can to get more videos I do on reviews, top 10s and the like. I lost my sponsor recently because they had to close down, sadly, so I rely now on my Patreons to help me get the games to review, because a lot of my stuff is not review copies, and this one and the Wingspan America's expansion I did recently, none of them were review copies. It's thanks to the Patreons that I was able to get to those. So I can't thank you Patreons enough for supporting the channel, and if you are able to join the Patreon, then please do. Until next time, remember, it's only a game, and I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video, probably with a glass of wine in hand. Who's feeling thirsty right now? Take care.